Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulullah. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. This is Edward Ahmed Mitchell. Welcome to Muslim Network TV. We're very happy to have you with us today. Today, we're going to be discussing a topic that I think all of us have thought about and all of us want to stop discussing, but we have to keep addressing it, and that's the issue of mass shootings. It seems almost every day there's a new report of a mass shooting somewhere in this country. Some of it motivated by hate, some of it by mental illness, some of it we don't even know why it happens, but we do know that it keeps happening over and over again. To discuss this issue, what we can do to prevent it, what the studies and data show about it, I'd like to bring on our special guest, Professor Dr. Marc A. Zimmerman, who is the Marshall Becker Collegiate Professor at University of Michigan. He's the co-director of the Institute for Firearm Injury Prevention. He's at the Department of Health and Behavior and Health Education at the Department of Psychology at and we're very happy to have him with us today. Hello, Professor Zimmerman. How are you?
Thank you very much for having me. Other than this news, I'm doing pretty well. Thank you.
Yes, yes. Again, we're sad that we have to keep discussing this, but we're happy to have your expertise. So, just we all know this, but give us an overview, Professor, of the state of mass shootings in America, the numbers, the trends, and how does this compare to 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago? Are things getting worse, better, about the same? Just give us an overview.
Well, the last 10 years, 20 years ago in that decade compared to this decade, and this does not include the last year or so, has more than doubled in terms of mass shootings in the United States. Since the turn of the year in January, we've seen more up to this time than any other city. I'm sorry, we've seen more from January until now than we've ever seen in this time period before in the United States. So the problem is clearly increasing, and that's obviously something we need to do something about.
So that begs the obvious question, Professor. Before we even talk about what to do about it, why? What is this a mental health crisis? Is it a crisis of guns? Is it a cultural? What are some of the explanations? And is there any indication in the data of commonalities in terms of are most of these, for example, people have been bullied and are snapping? Are these people who are mentally ill? These people who are racist and carrying out hate crimes? What does the data show us about why this is happening in the different types of mass shootings that are happening?
Well, I want to first start to say that we haven't done a lot of research in this area over the last 20 to 30 years, and we are starting to do more of it, and not only because of the clearly emergency that we need to be addressing this epidemic, but partly because of recognition both at the federal level and also local levels that we do need to do something about it. Not all firearm injury and death are created the same. Most firearm injuries actually, or deaths in particular, are suicides. So, and that doesn't include suicides that may occur during the time of a mass shooting. Though horrific and increasing, do only account for about 1% of all firearm deaths in the United States. I think that's something that we really need to put in perspective, not to suggest that we don't need to do something about it, but to point out that there is a lot bigger and other problems around firearm injury and death that we do need to pay attention to. Now, to directly answer your question, yes, we know about 75 to 80% of all mass shooters have some kind of grievance. That grievance may be from employers, might be something about being bullied at school, and it might be grievances that they're reading and hearing about that engage in that result in racism and feeling like they're not able to get jobs, and so they want to blame immigrants, or they feel like people are getting unfair treatment, and so they want to even the playing field. Whatever those racist interpretations are, all of these things are those underlying grievances that we do know are associated with mass shooters. That you also mentioned issues around guns. I've talked to many gun owners around the country, and I have yet to find very many. I guess there's been a few, but I've yet to find very many who don't support the idea that we don't need to have firearms that semi-automatic firearms. There's not really a lot of reason for sport whether it's hunting or target shooting, that you would need a semi-automatic weapon. And so there is a lot of support in the United States, I think, across the aisle, as well as across owners and non-owners, to say, what do we need these mass killing machines for? And so that's part of the issue too. But it's not only that; it's also mental health, and then increasing services for mental health, helping each other recognize signs in loved ones and people we care about, our friends, knowing signs that maybe the grievances are building, or they're or the what they're saying and what they're paying attention to is changing all of a sudden. When they're starting to look at where to buy more weapons, and they're buying many more weapons and guns and bullets and whatnot, and wondering what's going on, and noticing those signs, and trying to get that person some help before it turns into a mass shooting event. Because we also know that rarely do people wake up in the morning and decide today's a good day to kill people. Usually there is that thing, those issues that are underlying that build up over time. And if we could recognize those signs and get people the help they need, we might avert some of these shootings.
Now, Professor Zimmerman, I know there's a big push among some on Capitol Hill to do something, and then a big push from others not to do anything. There was some legislation passed recently regarding gun safety reform. Didn't go as far as advocates wanted, but can you tell us about that legislation? Any positive impact from that?
Oh, I don't know about the federal legislation. I know that often just kind of dies in committee, as it turns out. And in Michigan, the legislature and the governor have moved in our state to implement some extreme risk protection laws, or red flag laws, which they're often called. And these are intended to, if we know the signs, if we know somebody might be a danger to themselves or others, that they can have a temporary removal of guns from in their lives. How those are implemented and what happens once that law goes into effect is we don't really know much about. But if we do have some of those laws, there is then at least a mechanism for removing firearms in a situation like that. I want to point out that we think about those for suicide. And if we know that 90% of all suicides that use a gun are successful, but we also know that 90% of non-successful suicide attempts are actually resolved with mental health services post-attempt. And so the idea of removing lethal means, i.e., a firearm, with either locking guns, or having ERPO laws if somebody feels like there might be a threat to themselves and or others, might be one way to thwart. It may not end it, but one way to thwart potential suicides in families. And then we don't yet know if that's going to make a difference in mass shootings. I think we can all agree that whatever side of the aisle you're on, that these mass shootings are heinous acts that we have to do something about.
So, Professor, let me ask you this. As we look to the future, I think one thing that maybe scares a lot of people is the fact that the guns are already out there, right? Even if, for example, tomorrow Congress decided they were going to do the most far-reaching gun safety reform they wanted, these weapons are already out there. Whatever's going on in society with the mental health issues, the cultural issues, it's already happening. Is there a way to put this genie back in the bottle in this generation, or do you think we're just going to be used to seeing this and we're just going to have to, fight it at the edges, but that we're not going to see a downward trend in these type of incidents? I mean, what are you fearing and expecting?
Well, I would say both, and honestly, I want to say that those of us who work in the Institute for Firearm Injury Prevention here at the University of Michigan, we're not about taking people's guns away, even if some people are thinking about doing that. There are well over 330 million guns in private hands in the United States. That doesn't include your job guns if you're a police officer, or any military guns. So the idea that we could take those guns away from anybody is doesn't really make sense. In the case of red flag laws, there is a hearing that is involved, a judge is involved, the police, loved ones are involved. There's a process for doing that, but there's not a way we're going to control guns in that sense. And we're not talking about gun control. We don't use those terms. I think if we live in a gun culture, I think we have to kind of accept that. The average home in America that has a gun has about 5 guns, and over 100 million homes in America have a gun. Most gun owners are responsible gun owners. So I don't think we want to. It's not about vilifying gun owners, but we do need to change our culture in ways where we don't have grievances against each other, and that we solve those grievances in reasonable ways. Guns that are semi-automatic weapons, perhaps reducing those, but there's 4 to 5 million of those guns in private hands as well. So we do have to think about ways that we can really change the way we think about working with each other, living with each other, appreciating difference, and realizing that we're all Americans and that this is not something about us against them.
Right. No one wants to see this happen. No one should want to see this sort of thing happen. Everyone should want their kids to be able to go to school safely and securely without the parent having to wonder, are they coming back in the afternoon? So, Professor, I want to thank you so much for joining us today. Really appreciate your perspective. I know it's an unpleasant topic to discuss, but we have to discuss it as long as this keeps happening. So, we pray that all of us protect from this sort of thing, God willing, and we hope, again, that we'll get some positive news in the future. Thank you, Professor.
Thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
And thank you all for watching. Again, very difficult subject to address. And, as people of faith, as Muslims, we, of course, know that, any society that's suffering from this is suffering from, a moral issue as well. When people feel helpless and feel they can just cause harm to other people and there are no consequences for it, that is a moral crisis, right? There is a consequence for harming people in this life. And so everyone has to understand that as well. So anyway, we've got work to do from the public health perspective, from the legislative perspective, and yes, even from the spiritual perspective. So we encourage all of you to do what you can to try to address this crisis across our country. Thank you all for joining us. We'll see you next time, inshallah, on Muslim Network TV. Until then, assalamu alaikum. May peace be upon you.